Well, thank you everyone for being here on our third webinar of the dashboard training series and first webinar of the year. So today we're going to continue with the listing blocks and forms. If you remember, our first webinar was about the listing blocks, some basic and a couple of advanced tips and tricks that we did in the first webinar. And the second webinar was on forms. So today we're starting to combine them, to use them together, and we're really going to be focused on the data aspect of it. Both components are used to basically either add data to Salesforce, edit data in Salesforce, or pull data from Salesforce to show to your users.
Hey, operator, there was a comment that they can't hear you very well, so I don't know if you're away from your microphone or if you could just speak up a little bit.
Okay, I might just have to talk a little bit louder. Let me look at my microphones volume. Give me 1 second. Okay, does this sound better? Maybe. Okay, I just upped the okay, perfect. Thanks for the thumbs up. Okay, so just as a refresher, remember forms, as the name implies, is you have a form builder built into CMS, and the form builder allows you to create custom forms. You can add your fields to capture information. You can either save the information to the CMS and then you can download it, or you can save it directly to Salesforce. And so the forms that we've built so far in the last two webinars have been mostly interacting with Salesforce, which is really our focus here. Is since what we're doing is building user experiences through a portal, and the portal somewhat implies that the user will log in and will have access to certain information for them and for the group that the portal is built for. Forms is a really great way of creating interactions where the users where you can capture data from the users, or they can edit existing information. And forms can actually be used to show data too. And I'm highlighting the word show because that's one of the keywords we're going to be looking at today. The listing block is more of a show data component. And what the listing block really does is allows you to pull data from Salesforce, show it in different formats. So you can show it as a calendar, as a data grid, as a chart, as an activity feed. So it has different ways of displaying that data for you. And then it has highly customized ways in using the custom template and things like that, that allows you to really use just HTML and CSS and things like that for the more techie of you all to show that data. Now, if you think about how, when you're interacting with Salesforce and you're either using a form or using a listing block, what's going to happen is that you're very quickly going to have to be able to filter and restrict that data. And although both words sound somewhat the same, they're a little bit different. So filters really is when you're showing data and you want to filter it by something. So it could be that you want to filter it by date, you want to filter it by user, you want to filter it by group. But the filter is really not meant to enforce a restriction on the data. It's just meant to show you a subset of data based on the filter that you want. While restrict data is more to make sure that the data you're showing is the data that you're supposed to be showing to that user. So the most common case of this is user specific or group specific data. So if a user logs into your portal and you want to show them donor data, going back to the donor portal that we've been building over the last couple of webinars, if you obviously don't want them to see donor data from other donors. So you want to restrict the access to data. And then, so the question starts, okay, we've seen a couple of forms, we've seen a couple of blocks. How do I enforce data restrictions and filters? So that's a little bit what we're going to be looking at today. As in our webinar, some basic assumptions that you have a basic understanding of HandsOn Connect or LlamaSite. If you use HandsOn Connect, or if you use LlamaSite, or if you use both, you're in the right webinar, where both tools are very similar from the CMS perspective. You have a basic understanding of Salesforce because we've been really focusing on the CMS and the tools it has to interact with Salesforce. We know that the CMS has a bunch of other things. You can build, a full website without ever interacting with Salesforce. But this is part of what we're focusing on right now. And a CMS level, basic to medium, that you've used the HandsOn Connect or LlamaSite CMS, even if it's a little bit or you have some knowledge of it. So how might we build more user interactions in the portal? So when I'm referring to the portal, I'm actually referring to the portal we've been building over the last 2 webinars, but it could be a portal of anything. It could be a member portal, it could be an affiliate portal, it could be a sponsor portal, it could be a portal for your volunteers, it can be multiple things. The one we're using as an example in these webinars is a donor portal. And then and we've built a couple of things already, like I said. So there's 3 keywords we're going to be focusing on a lot today. One is show, one is filter, and one is restrict. And these are all driven through the data. So show is how do we pull data out so we can show it. Filter is how do we filter that data so that we can show it in different aspects. And restrict is how do we make sure that data that's not supposed to be shown under that context, maybe it's the user that's logged in, or the group they belong to, or the role they have, how do we make sure they can't access data that they shouldn't be accessing? So let's start with getting data from Salesforce, because for all 3, basically for show, filtering, and restriction, it's very likely that you're going to use data from Salesforce to determine how you're going to do this. So if you're going to show data, most likely you're pulling it from Salesforce, from a custom object, from your account, from your affiliation, from something to show it to the user. And in our donor portal, we're actually showing opportunity data. So we're using the opportunity object in Salesforce to pull the opportunity data to see the donations that our user has either posted or pledged. And so that's basically the data we're showing. But we also need to filter it by that user. We don't want to show it, like I said earlier, we don't want to show our users data when we're pulling this data. So basically we need a way to filter. Now, interesting enough is all the data we need to show, filter, and restrict is actually coming from Salesforce, because all the opportunity data is in Salesforce. The contact information is also in Salesforce, which is going to give us the contact ID, which is how we're going to filter it. And we might even filter it by something else. We might see if they're a member of something, if their membership is up to date, and things like that, if we're starting to look at other aspects of that data. So we need to be able to pull the data to show, but we also need to pull from Salesforce the data we're going to use to filter that data. So there's a key distinction here between, so now we're going what we call methods. So when you pull data from Salesforce, you can ask for it, and most likely you're using a listing block, or the forms can also show data. You're asking for it through one of the components, or you're using it in a session. Okay, so let's define a couple of things here. So in the ask method, what's happening is you created a listing block to show all the donations. And when that page gets loaded, when the user goes to that page, the data is pulled directly from Salesforce Live. So you're getting the most recent set of data. There's a little asterisk here, is that the listing block does have a caching feature that allows you to cache the data so it doesn't pull it as often. But let's ignore that for the moment. And so every time you pull that listing block or that form or anything like that, you're going to be pulling the data at live. Now, the session method is a little bit different. So let's first define what a session is. So a session is when a user arrives to your site for the first time. Basically, what's called a browser session is created. So, and that's why all these cookies get created and all those different things. The minute they log in, okay, now a user session has started, because when they log in, we've authenticated them and we've determined, okay, this is the person who has an account here. They've supplied a username, they've supplied a password, and we need to assume that's the right person. And so now we assume that they have access to their data. And then when that session gets initiated, there's several variables that go into session, because now we have a session that's a user session that's active. And what that allows us to do is to put data in that session. So we have it available to filter and restrict throughout that whole session. And the session usually ends when they log out or the session expires. They forgot to log out, but they come in 2 days later and now they have to log in again, which means that session no longer exists and they have to create a new one. And so an important thing to understand about session data is that it gets pulled from Salesforce when the user logs in. So if the data changes while they're in that session, the session data will not be updated. It's pulling that, the data from when they log in. So so just keep that in mind, because it just varies a little bit how that data gets updated. And then the ask method is used mostly to show data. It's actually always used to show data, while the session data is used mostly to filter and restrict. Okay, and I know that there's, if you've been to the previous webinars, I spent very little time on the slides, but here I'm spending a little bit more time because I'm trying to show some distinctions here. So let's look at the first method, the ask method. So basically you have a form, you have a listing block, maybe you have a couple of forms, a couple of listing blocks, and then you also have HandsOn Connect or LlamaSite. And what that allows you to do is to use the portal to pull data from Salesforce. So it's a pretty simple method. You have a listing block, you connect it to an object, let's say your opportunities, as we have it in the donor portal, and then we pull that data into that listing block. Or you have a form like we did in the previous webinar, where we allowed them to basically update their update their data profile through a form. So this is really all that's happening. Looks like I went back a little bit here. So this is really all that's happening in this first method. And this applies mostly to forms and listing blocks. There's other blocks that do this, especially in HandsOn Connect, like the search results and the featured opportunities, but we're basically focusing on forms and listing blocks here. The second method, which is the session parameters method, is basically Amy, who's our user, comes to the site, logs in, and as I said earlier, when they log in, a couple of things are happening. One, we authenticate them, which means we're verifying that they have the right credentials to enter, and we assume that because they have the right credentials, this is actually Amy. A session is initiated, and at that point, the system has access to Amy's information, mostly from her contact record and from the related account record, which is usually a household if you're using NPSP. So, by the way, we're going to be going through these through a couple of examples and showing things and how to do things. So if you forgot everything I said in the last 5 minutes, don't worry about it. Now, what we're going to be working on today, we're going to do some CMS pages, some listing blocks, some forms. We're actually not going to be building a lot. But we are going to be showing, based on what we did before, how we're already using some of this. And then really the new thing here that we really haven't touched upon are standard session variables and custom session variables. And the difference really is that they're both identical, except that the standard ones we give to you already. So you already have access to the contact ID and things like that when a session is initiated, and I'll show you how to access those. And then if you need to bring in other variables into your portal or into the session to be more accurate, then you can create custom session variables. Okay, this table is mostly because when you look at this video again, this is probably going to be a useful video. At this point, it's probably not very useful. Sorry, useful table. So, but this summarizes a lot of what I said. And once you start working with session variables and such, I think this will come in pretty handy. So I talked a lot about standard and custom session variables. And these are variables that are held in the session once the person logs in, and there's a form, and basically they can be used to filter and restrict. And I'm not sure what's happening with my mouse here. It seems like it's overly sensitive today. So, and then there's a format, and this, you're going to see that all session variables start with an S:, and then the name of the variable. there's also two other types of parameters. There are query parameters and path parameters, and we've actually used these all already. And so I'm going to point them out. But basically, a query parameter is when you send a parameter in the URL of that you're using to filter. It obviously if you filter, it restricts. But the problem is because it's in the URL, it's not necessarily secure, because someone can start guessing ID, different parameters up there, and that's why we say you should only use it for filtering. And then there's path parameters, which is exactly the same thing as a query parameter, except that it's a little bit cleaner in the URL, because it doesn't put this question mark. See how it says question mark ID? It just puts the ID in the page. So it's a little bit cleaner. It's a little bit friendlier for SEO and things like that. And then there's some advanced methods, which we're not going to talk about at all today. But I did want to point them out, that you can use your data in different ways using more advanced methods, such as JavaScript. And then you'll see that each of these parameters, the session parameters start with an S, the query parameters start with a Q, and path parameters start with a P. I would usually ask if you have any questions here, but I'm sure you have a ton, but I think a lot will be clarified once I start showing things. So I'm just going to jump into examples. So the first thing I'm really going to do is I want to show you that the query parameters and path parameters you've seen on all websites already. So if I go, for example, here to Amazon, and you look at this URL, you'll see that Amazon is besides the name of the page, it's sending a bunch of information up here in the URL. So you'll see that it has DP, then this number here. So notice that this number is like in what we call in the path, which means it's between two forward slashes. And so that's called the path parameter. I have no idea what that number does, but it is telling Amazon to do something on this page, to filter by something or do something differently. And then you'll see there's a bunch of parameters after this question mark. I think it got really dark there in the URL, but I'm trying to highlight it there. So when there's a question mark in the URL, everything to the right of that is called a query parameter. And you can see that it's sending some ID there, because I'm assuming it's ID because it says CRID. And so it's basically what this is doing is, if you remove all this, then you'll probably get an error page, because Amazon will not know which book you're looking at. It will basically, it uses the parameters to filter what you're looking at to show you the correct book. Now, it's not really restricting it. Amazon doesn't really care if you start playing around up here and put different IDs and you land on a different book. So it's not really restricting, it's just filtering. Okay, so now let's go back to the portal we've been building over the last two webinars. So if you remember, the first thing we did was build this page here. And this page has three components. It has these metrics at the top. It has a list in the middle of all the donations for this user. And then it has a graphic at the bottom of their donations per year. It has, and these are all listing blocks because I'm all showing data. So if I go over here and go to my donor dashboard, so I'm using this browser to basically be logged in as a CMS user, and the other one to be logged in as an actual authenticated user. So you'll see that now that I'm CMS, if I click here, it opens up this dashboard. I can see that I'm using a custom card template. I'm pulling the information out of a contact from a Salesforce view called LLS Donor Metrics, which I created earlier, last year. And then I basically put a bunch of HTML here with my data here, so I could get these nice little boxes here, right up here. This one here is basically a data table. So I'm pulling from opportunities from a view that I created last year called Donor Opportunities. And then that has all these fields, and then I basically turned on and off the fields that I wanted to show in that table. I also enabled facets here, which we talked very briefly about. And that's how I got this table, the list of donations here. And this last one is my chart. Once again, I'm pulling from opportunities. I'm pulling, I think, from the same view, but my display format here is column chart. So I could have done a bar chart, pie chart. I mean, I can also, you'll see that you have our things, maps and things like that. And this is how I'm showing the chart. And here is where I configured my chart. Now, for this to really work, I need to be able to, so notice that I'm logged in as a generic CMS user here, which really doesn't have in my case, this doesn't have a contact, this contact doesn't exist. This account I'm logged in as does not have an account that exists in Salesforce, so it's not showing me any data. But if I go back to here where I'm logged in as my test user, it does show me data. So part of what we're talking about, we've already done, which is basically restrict. Okay, because when I set this up last year, I had to make sure I was only pulling data for this specific user. And the way I did this was with a session variable. And I actually, to be more precise, I did it with a standard session variable, which means it's a variable that we give you already once you log in. And so I can go look at that here. I'll just pick the donations one. And if you look at our filters, which I know can be a little bit confusing because we're using this to restrict more than to filter, you see that I'm looking for all the opportunities here where the primary contact ID is equal to the ID of the user who's logged in. And so where do I get this from? Well, a lot of our components will, if you look at the information, it will tell you what's available. We call these actually tokens, these session variables, because they're a token that converts into actual data. So you'll see that you have a token that's called S current user ID, S current account ID, S current contact ID, and a couple more. And I mean, our documentation will define what these are, and so I'm not going to go into that. But the main one probably the one that you're going to use most often is S current user ID. This is the ID of the user who's currently logged in, and it's the ID of the contact ID. So it's basically, if you go into Salesforce and you look up that contact, which is this one here, Amy, it's her ID, which is this ID that Salesforce puts in the URL. And if you're keeping track, this is a path parameter because it does not have that question mark. It's built into the path of the URL. So when Amy logs in, we're going to automatically put in this session variable called current user ID. We're going to put that ID here, and it's going to be available to you in any form in any listing block for you to filter by or restrict by. And so when I'm telling my listing block is take the primary contact ID and look and only show opportunities where this primary contact ID is equal to the contact ID of the user who's logged in. So one thing you could do is you could, when you're building a filter, is notice that on my filter sections, I have access to basically every field that's in the view I'm using, and then all the related fields. So this is actually this is super useful, but it can be confusing. So related fields is any lookup or any master detail. And I know I'm using Salesforce terms here. So it's basically any relationship this record has. Remember, these are opportunities. So the opportunity is going to be related to an organization. It's going to be related to a campaign, honorary contact. So these are all your lookups or master detail fields that basically relate this opportunity to another record. And so you'll see that there's this primary contact. And the primary contact of an opportunity is actually the donor. So, and since the person who's logged in right now, Amy, is the donor I want to show data for, that's what I'm going to relate it for. So the way I added this filter here, I'll take it out and I'll just re-add it, is I select the primary contact, and then I'm going to filter, I'm only going to show where it matches their user ID. I could cut and paste this here, but you can also just click on it, and these will be all your session variables that are available. And you can also start typing. So I can do s:\current, and it'll start filtering. And so I'll pick my current user ID, I'll add this, and save it. So now if I go back to my here, it should continue to filter by that user. And just to confirm that I'm only seeing that these are actually her opportunities, I can go to her record in Salesforce, look at my related records, and I'll see that these should match up. And there's 10 here. And I know there's 10 here because it says so down here. I mean, you can compare one by one. They're all there. So basically, I'm using a session variable to filter this block to make sure that only Amy, only the opportunities that belong to Amy are shown when she logs in. And this is the same logic that I apply for the other blocks here. So I'll just show you quickly. If I go to the top one with my metrics, in this case, it's actually pulling from the contact, not from the opportunity, because NPSP summarizes all this data in the contact for me. So in this case, I'm filtering the contact ID of the contact equals my current ID. And then here for my chart, I'm also, this is coming from the opportunity. I'm filtering my primary contact by current ID, same as the data table. Now, let's say that for some reason I wanted to not show, I only wanted to show those that have been posted and pledged. So I could filter this further by using a constant, which we really haven't talked about. So I just want to show you that this is possible, but this is really the only mention I'm going to make of it today. That I could come here and select stage and just type in the word posted. And you'll see that because it's a lookup, it knows that that's a value there, add it. So now it's going to filter not only the opportunities for this contact, but also for the only those that are posted. And you'll see that now it only filtered those that are posted. I'm going to remove that. And I could have left it. The only reason I removed it is because I had enabled facets, which I did it on the stage, and I can actually filter up here. So if I want to look at 8 that posted, I can add that and it will filter them automatically. If I wanted to add pledged and posted, it will put them both. If I want to remove them. So basically for this list and block, I have those, I have facets enabled. Now, okay, so we talked about session variable. We've talked about a standard session variable, which already comes, you don't have to add it. And we're going to talk about how to add a session variable a little bit later, a custom session variable. But before I do that, I want to do a path, basically parameters. So I want to show something based on using a path parameter. So remember, if you remember correct, if you remember, the path parameter is the one here where the ID I'm trying to, or whatever the key I'm trying to filter on is coming through the URL. It's not in the session, it's coming through the URL. And we already did this. So when we added this pay now button, I'm going to take them to a form where they can pay. And so what happens is if I click on it, I need to pull the right donation or the right opportunity from Salesforce to show them so that they can pay the correct one. And you'll see that I included up here in the URL that ID. So how did I do that? If I go to my listing block here, and I go basically to paying this, what I did is on the button here. So I added basically this is a formula field in Salesforce. And so what I ended up doing here is that to be able to send them, so I'm doing a couple things here. One is if it's pledged, I want to show them a pay now button. If it's not pledged, then I want to show them that it's paid. Now, I need to do a trick here, which we covered this when I did this very quickly, is that I have to use, I'm using a formula in Salesforce for this. So I'm going to go to my opportunities here. I'm going to edit my object. And if you, so basically that field's go LLS pay action here. So the idea here is not that much on how to create a formula, but this is a nifty little trick that you can use if you need to show different actions or different things depending on some criteria that you have in Salesforce that you could do in a formula. So basically what I'm telling you here is if the amount outstanding, which means there's still a balance on their pledge or their donation, if there's still an amount of, it's greater than 0, which means it's still outstanding, then take them to this page, donation/P. This is really important, this P, because this is what you need to put the //P before the ID, because that's what tells LlamaSite or HandsOn Connect that basically what's coming next is a path parameter. That's where the information you need is going to be. I could have also done it directly here, and I will add a custom column here. Now I'll leave it here at the front. It's not going to be the best place to have it, but I'm going to basically put a URL here. I'm going to label it donation link, and it's going to be a clickable URL, and then I want to send it to my donation page. I happen to know it's called donation. That's the name of the page. So if I and then remember, I have to put the P so that the system knows that what's coming next is the parameter. And then the next thing I'm going to do is add the ID. So I know it's ID, but if you haven't, if you're not sure what the name of the ID is, you can go through your list here and then see, okay, here's my opportunity ID, and this is the name, is the ID. And then to convert that ID into something dynamic, you put it between squirrely brackets, and that information is down here, just in case you have any doubt. And then I'm going to save that. I have to give it a name here. So. Okay, so let's go to here, Amy. We'll do a refresh. Okay, so now I have my donation links here. If I click on this donation link here, it's going to take me to the exact same place. It's doing the exact same thing. It's sending it to the page called donation. I added the /P and my parameter in here so that I could filter by it. It's doing the exact same thing that the button on the right is doing. Now notice that I have donation links on all of them now. And this could be fine because if I click on this, I already made this donation, so this is going to be confusing. I could make this form a little bit smarter, that if the donation is already made, hide the submit and donation, and I just use it as information. There's a bunch of things I could do here, but the experience I really wanted here was that they have a link if they owe money. If they already paid it, they don't. So, but I just wanted to show you that that really this is the way you create a link. You can, this is how you add the ID, you send it to a page. And now we're going to look at, well, now that I've gone to that page, how does this page, which is a form, know to use this URL, this ID up here to show the right opportunity? So I'm going to open a new session here in the browser that I'm logged in as a CMS user. So this is an instance where we're using a form to edit information, technically, because although we're not really letting them edit anything in the opportunity, but we could, we're just showing what we really want them to do is pay here. This information, this opportunity already exists in Salesforce, so we're not creating a new one. So we're basically editing this opportunity or capturing the payment. Since the data already exists in Salesforce, there's a couple things that we need to make sure that we do up here. One is that sync data with Salesforce is on, because this is how the CMS knows that you're intending to save or pull data from Salesforce, not from the local CMS data store, which you can download from to Excel later. You're also, because you're editing information, and remember that I am showing them the name of the donation and the amount they owe up here, because we are opening an existing opportunity. I want to populate the fields in my form with data from Salesforce. So I'm going to have to enable this. And on top of that, I want to update the record, which means that when they submit it, I want to make sure it updates the information that the payment was received and all that. Something that's important, and there's two ways of doing this, is remember that we're probably using session variables here, which means session variables requires that the user be logged in. A good practice is to check this off, is required login. I know that sometimes we don't, because if I go to the page, the donation page, which is where this form is, I can tell it down here that this page is only for logged users. So this should take care of it, but even if the page you're on is for logged users, it's always a good practice to make sure that the form is set to that too. And then I basically, for all of you who have used forms, this should look super familiar. I added a field here. The only difference is that I really don't want them to be able to change the donation form or the amount. So I made this field read-only. So you'll see that it's read-only here. I added basically the payment component so that they can pay them out. And then I put in a hidden field for posted, because when they submit this payment, I want to change the stage from pledged to posted. And so I've talked a lot, but I haven't answered the question I set out to answer when I first got in here is, okay, this is great. I have the donation form, I'm showing the data I want, but how do I make sure that I'm showing the right opportunity? And so the way I'm going to do that is I'm sending, because in my URL that I created, I'm sending the ID of the opportunity. I'm going to use the ID in the URL to pull the data from the right opportunity. So so if I go to advanced settings down here, you're going to see that there's a section called record source ID. Okay. And then remember that when we were looking at the slideshow, I said that the session variables start with S. path parameters start with P and query parameters start with Q. And so the way path parameters work is that you can have up to 4 of them. So if I had, for example, this is my opportunity ID, but let's say I added another ID here, another ID, this would be parameter number 2. In this case, I'm only using 1. So if I come here, you'll see that I can use up to 4 parameters. So I could have basically separated 4 parameters up here with /. I'm only using 1. So I'm basically telling it to when they pull the data from the opportunity, I know I'm pulling from the opportunity because I selected the object up here, to basically pull the record that corresponds to the ID that's in the URL. So that's how I'm filtering. Similar to what I showed you how Amazon does it. You're filtering here, and then that's how, when I come here, it's pulling the opportunity that corresponds to the one that I clicked on the previous page. Right here. There's a couple more things you could do here. You could if I wanted to. So in this case, it's a form, so you're only pulling 1 record. So if I put the contact ID, for example, here, that it's where I'm filtering by, and I'm going to filter by primary contact. Remember, the contact might have multiple opportunities. So in this case, it's only going to pull the first one, and in whatever order Salesforce has it. So you do have to think that if you're using a form, this parameter has to be unique enough that will only pull 1 record. Okay. Now notice that I could, if I was really bored, I could start putting in different numbers here. And if I did it long enough, or I was lucky enough, at some point I'm gonna land on an opportunity that's not this one. It might not even be mine. It might be someone else. Okay. And I'll show you this by So if I open my opportunities here, let's go to all opportunities. I'll go to this opportunity here, and notice that this one does not belong to Amy. It belongs to Jennifer. And if I grab that ID up here and went over here, I'm just going to open that page. It's going to show it to me. I'm logged in as Amy. This is not my opportunity. So it's going to show it to me. So this is when I talk about sometimes you're using the parameter to filter, sometimes you're using it to restrict, sometimes you're using it for both. So in this case, I'm only using it for filtering. So it does what I wanted to do, but I might want to enforce that not only does the URL ID for the opportunity match the ID that the opportunity I'm looking for, but I might want to make sure that this opportunity belongs to the person who's logged in. So if I log into my form again and come down here, you'll see that there's an enforce session parameters section. And so what I could do here is basically grab the primary contact, and you guessed it, it should match the session current ID. Now, what happens is that because this ID is in the session, the user can't go in and change it. It's not like they can come up here to the URL and start changing it. So it's going to have to match that. And I can add that filter. So now I have 2 things happening. I'm using the parameter, this path parameter, to filter the record I want to show. And I'm using the session variable here to make sure that that user actually has the right to see that. And so I can save that. And notice that now that this is the one that Amy was not supposed to be able to see. Now she can't see. She can see the form, and you can see them. I have to check why the donation amount is not here. It shouldn't be down here. I don't know if that's just the default that's there. But now, even if she's able to get to this opportunity because she has access to the form, she can't get to the data. So that, and there's tons of ways of, mixing and matching here. But what I really want to convey here is that when you're looking at pulling data from Salesforce, you should always be thinking, do I need to filter? Do I need to restrict, or do I need to do both? And then also think about what's the best way to make sure that the ID that you're using to filter restrict is in the right place. So if you remember the table I showed earlier here, restrict, we only recommend session parameters. You could add 4 query or path parameters that combined make it really unique, which make it really hard for someone to figure it out, but it can still be figured out in the long run. So use session variables to restrict. You can use basically all other ones to filter however you see best. Okay, so now let's go back to, I'm going to go back to my test. These are all test users, but I'm going back to Amy this time, because this is the user I'm actually logged in as. So let's say that I wanted to show something to Amy based on some piece of information that's here. I wanted to restrict or filter something, and I want it to do, for example, I'm going to use this membership level here. And I'm going to say if she's a partner, actually, she's already a member. I'll leave it member. If she's a member, I'm going to show something or filter something on the site for her. And so what I really need to do is add my own session variable. So far, the S current user ID, that's a standard session variable. But now this is actually a field that is not part of what we include when someone logs in. And that's because we don't include all the fields, but it also allows you to add your own custom fields, like the membership level is. That's a custom field. And then somehow, if I want to use it in the portal, I need to have it available in the portal. And so I could create a listing block, add it to a list view and pull it, and I can see the level. But this time I want to use it to restrict. And remember, to restrict, I need to use a session variable. So I'm going to add a custom session variable. And if you go to add-ons here, you'll see that there's a section called custom session variables. And this might not be enabled for everyone. So if it's not enabled for you, just open the ticket and we'll enable it. And I'm going to add a new custom variable here. And what it does is it tells me which object, okay? We're going to ignore the query string. So because this is associated to the user that's logged in, at the end of the day, we only really know 2 pieces of information about the contact who's logged in. Their contact, whatever's in the contact record and whatever is in the related account record that they have. The membership level is in the contact record. So now I'm going to look for that field. It has a funny name because it has an L in front of it. So it's easy to find. And notice that it's going to create a session variable for me here, or the token. This is what it's going to look like. It's going to be S:, because it's a session variable. And then it's going to have this name here. So I'm going to copy this here. I don't really need it, but just to show you something a little bit later. And then I'm going to leave it as active. So if you have a session variable that you're no longer using, you might as well deactivate it so it's not pulling that data. But in this case, I'm going to use it. So I'm going to save that. Now I have my session variable that's coming from the contact. That's great. And so let me go to my dashboard. And if I came to this listing view, and let's say that I wanted to filter by something here, so I'll leave it name. I'm only showing you. I'll have my session variable there. I can add it and I can filter by it. This filter actually makes no sense because the name has nothing to do with the membership. I just wanted to show you how you would use it here. Now, and so it would add this filter. In this case, if I did have a field here that had to do with members, I could filter as long as that field is equal to members. So this is, if I had a field in my opportunities that had the word members in it, I could compare it and only show them those. Now, you can use this in other places too, and which is not necessarily in list and blocks and forms and things like this, but it helps you create navigation for different users. I'm gonna end on this. So I'll be ending like in 2 minutes. If you have questions, so you can start posting things so we can start answering them. But know that the session variables are available in other places. So like in a menu item, let's say that for some reason, I only wanted to show the contact for users where basically, this is the field I just added, membership level equal member. Then this link would only show up if the user is member. Remember that Amy is a member, but if it was a partner or didn't have any type of it would hide that menu. So this is just a glimpse into that. This is available at Pages, Blocks, and different places that you can use to control what folks can view or not. And it does it for a session, so it's not something that's easy for an end user to change. But and it can be used to not only filter data to show specific data, but also to filter usability, like the case I just showed. And I think with that, I'm gonna wrap it up. Do we have any questions?